Good evening, everybody. It is wonderful to have a chance to see you all, and so glad that you're here with us. We want to wish everyone Chag Sameach as we begin our entrance into the holy time of Shavuot, the culmination of our 50 days of journeying through the wilderness from Egypt to arrive here at the foot of Mount Sinai to celebrate this extraordinary moment of meeting not only with each other, but also with the Holy One. And we have a fantastic program for us this evening to focus on themes of Jewish leadership with one of the most, I think, learned people in that subject really in our country. And we'll have a chance to meet Rabbi Elke Abrahamson, the president of the Wexner Foundation, in a few moments. There has never been, I think, a week in recent years when the words of Yehuda Halevi have rung more authentically for me. Libi b'mizrach v'ani b'sof ha'ma'arav. My heart is in the east, but I am at the edge of the west. To see the anguishing images coming out of the land and the modern state of Israel, I think has pulled at the heartstrings of all of us. I think there is a sense of anguish that we all feel and a sense of deep-seated prayer that the current cycle of violence will come to a speedy conclusion. There will be no more casualties on either side of this horrible conflict, that we will not hear the scream of missiles coming from the Gaza Strip, and we will not hear a similar scream of missiles coming from the Iron Dome to protect Israeli communities, that we will not see any more turmoil in Jewish communities between Israeli and other Israeli, and that we will soon know a sense of peace. So I wanted to start this evening just to take a few moments of prayer that we might offer for the land and the state of Israel. So we say, Avinu Shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alo barech Medinat Yisrael reshit tzmichat ge'ulatenu. O Heavenly One, protector and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, the first flowering of our redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say amen. We'll just take a moment to sort of hold a sense of prayerfulness for our friends, our family who are in Israel, and pray that they will pass this holy night in safety and security and quiet and the beginning of a new period of tranquility. Tonight, I think it's appropriate that we are going to be talking a little bit, obviously, about what's happening in Israel through a particular lens of Jewish leadership. And I'm just incredibly honored and thrilled to be able to share with you my teacher, my mentor, my colleague, Rabbi Elke Abrahamson, who is the president of the Wexner Foundation. The Wexner Foundation, for more than 30 years, has been devoted to promoting Jewish leadership in all its facets within the Jewish world, both in North America and in Israel. They have several different programs that help to train not only professional leadership, but lay leadership and Israeli leaders as well, and those who have already spent time in their professional work with a variety of different programs and initiatives over the years. Those of us here in Boca Raton have been blessed to have two cohorts of Wexner Heritage Fellows through the auspices of the Jewish Federation. I was blessed to be in the fourth class of Wexner Fellows, which was a blessing for me because not only did I meet an incredible cadre of colleagues in different elements of Jewish life, whether it's the rabbinate, cantorate, Jewish education, Jewish communal services, and academia across the denominational spectrum, but there's not a chance in China I would be accepted for the Wexner Foundation if I were applying today. It has, the fellowship has become pretty much the gold standard, the most sought after fellowship in graduate Jewish study. And we're really excited. Rabbi Abrahamson has been part of the Wexner Foundation for 20 years, joining in 2001. She was ordained by the Hebrew Union College after growing up in Minnesota as a member of what she likes to call the Frozen Chosen. and earned her teaching degree from the University of Minnesota, spent the early years of her career creating curricula for religious schools and informal educational settings like Jewish summer camp, which is really her passion and her home. She attended the Hebrew Union College, was ordained from HUC in New York, and served as an associate rabbi at Peninsula Temple Bethel, one of the other franchises in San Mateo, California. And then she and her husband, my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Misha Zinkow, were co-senior rabbis at Mount Zion Temple in St. Paul, Minnesota, before moving to Columbus, Ohio, and joining the Wexner Foundation. She is probably one of the most astute observers of Jewish life, and certainly the promotion of Jewish leadership really in the Jewish world. She is a much sought after scholar and speaker, someone who is an advisor. She has an amazing ability, it's rare, to make you feel like you're the most important person to her, even though she knows thousands of people. And there's been many times in my career where I've been really blessed by her guidance and her support and her love, and to be able for us to be able to learn with her and from her tonight is really a tremendous privilege. So welcome to all of you. Chag Sameach. We're glad that you're all here, and especially Rabbi Abrahamson, it's wonderful to have you as part of our roundtable that we're going to have tonight, along with Rabbi Nates and Rabbi Pessa, who have joined us. And we'll have a chance to also have you be able to join us. If you have questions as we go through our conversation this evening, I encourage you to use the chat feature on Zoom so that we can address your questions. And depending on how many people we ultimately turn out to be, we may be able to make this a little less formal and have you address questions personally. But in the meantime, we're going to sort of invite you to please address those questions in the chat. And so I think the first question that I'd like to ask is really just from 30,000 feet, why does leadership matter? And what drew you from the beautiful sunny confines of St. Paul, Minnesota, to come on board at the Wexner Foundation? And why was the study, the promotion, the work, and the development of Jewish leadership a calling for you?
First of all, thank you. I'm going to take a step back, Dan, and just thank you for a beautiful introduction. And I want to assure you, you would be accepted if you applied today. I have that on just very clear authority. You are still in that very unique cadre of super talent. And I'm delighted to join you. It's really just a treat, as well as your entire team. I've asked Rabbi Levin if we could go by first names this evening. You know, the Midrash tells us we all stood together at Sinai, and tonight we come back to that mountain, and we're all equals. So let's just go by the name we called each other at Sinai. And Dan, I called you Dan at Sinai, so that's what we're going to go with tonight. I don't think I have to make much of a case for why leadership matters. It matters mightily, and we can all speak to why. And I think we're living through a particularly intense era of the power that leaders have to shape community, shape society, and to unify and to divide us. I think that leadership is how we get to the common good. And it's really hard. It's how we get to justice. It's how we get to equity. It's how we get to a more even playing field. It's how we close gaps between the haves and the have-nots in our societies. Leaders offer hope in a way that's believable, and effective leaders offer hope with a strategic plan that's possible, and they offer a vision with actual solutions to go with that vision. Leaders question prevailing assumptions that we all lived with. They create this space, and I think the best leaders create the time for change to unfold. Fundamentally, leadership is about change. That's how we define it at the foundation. Leadership is about change. Change is inevitably about loss, and loss is really, really difficult. My favorite leadership teacher, Marty Linsky and Ron Heifetz, taught me the line that leadership is about delivering change at a rate the community can absorb. I'm going to say that again. delivering change or loss even at a rate the community can absorb. And effective leaders have the courage to put out a vision of what the world could look like. The world can be a congregation, the world can be a family, the world can be a community. They put it out with a certain bold voice, a bold vision. They say, here's what could be. Here's how we get there. And they stay just ahead of, but not too far ahead of the crowd, so the crowd doesn't get lost. They are able to paint a realistic picture of the future. Every morning, the daily service begins with very familiar words to all of us. As my colleagues know, we start the service with the words, "Ma tovu olecha Yaakov u'mishkatecha Yisrael." How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. I'm sure you can all now sing. You're all muted, so please, you can sing whatever version you know. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. It's a rather well-known story, although it's sort of buried in the summer parshiot. Some of us don't know it because a lot of us don't learn the summer parsha as well as the parshiot during the year. But a non-Hebrew prophet for hire, Balaam, was supposed to go and curse the Israelites, and he famously goes and blesses us. And the rabbis ask, well, what did this sorcerer see that was so beautiful, right? And there's all kinds of midrashim about how we had a sort of our tents were equal distance apart from each other. The doors didn't face each other, so we respected each other's privacy. We were in a circle, etc. But as I've prayed these words every morning in my role and through some very challenging leadership times, I've changed the declaration to a question mark. And I think, Dan, good leaders do that. It's not how beautiful are your tents, but you can put a question mark at the end because of the what, and say, how beautiful are your tents, right? How good is this community? And I think that question has to be asked every day by those of us who are exercising leadership, and figure out the distance between your answer, right, and what is. And thoughtful leaders then take us there. But it's not a periodic question. It's a daily question. I'm just going to give you I'm just going to check off in my head some important points about what it means to exercise leadership. Dan, you know this from your Wexner education. A leader is not a person. A leader is an activity. That's why we say we exercise leadership, because anyone can do it, right? Just because you're named the leader doesn't make you the person who knows how to get us there. So I'm very, very cognizant of that teaching, that we exercise leadership, that it's a verb, it's something anyone can do, not just you. And you know that very well. It means supporting people and facing hard truths. It means bridging gaps between aspiration and what is, resolving conflicts without abandoning your values, naming your values, questioning how much you're using influence versus power versus authority. You help people renegotiate loyalties, and you're constantly learning new skills. Why was I called to this? You mentioned my my summer camp experience when I was 16. I was a CIT at my camp in Wisconsin, and it had been the tradition for a bazillion years, because that's how long traditions are at camp, right? 2 days is a bazillion years. That the camp song was taught by a man, and it always had been. And my CIT director said to me, "You're going to teach the camp song." And I was really surprised. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you got it." So I always wondered what that meant. And I really wanted to figure out how everyone can have the it. That's always been a passion of mine. And also how not to abuse it, how not to take advantage of it, how not to manipulate people, how not to be, how to use charisma effectively, but not inappropriately. So it's always been churning in my head. It's always been clear to me that great institutions like yours, great ideas, great programs, great projects, life, world-altering progress is driven by a single leader. And I actually sat today and tried to think of something that wasn't. What's happened in the world that one person didn't, really get out and drive that. And that fascinates me. And so I was intrigued by the foundation. I was invited to teach. I taught. I was invited to run one of the programs. I loved being a congregational rabbi like you, and I assume your colleagues. I loved it. And it was a huge leap of faith, but I also wanted to try to help other individuals exercise effective leadership in the Jewish community because of all the things I just said, because of how much it matters. And the other piece I will say is that the foundation crosses movements. We have ultra-Orthodox Jews, we have secular Jews, we have halakhic egalitarian Jews, we have Orthodox women rabbis, we have it all. But the leadership principles remain the same, which just fascinates me.
So I'm struck by that, what you said, when your counselor or your colleague or whomever said you have it. Abraham Joshua Heschel, when he was writing about prophecy, wrote that revelation is an indispensable groundwork for religion. To understand the true spirit of Israel, it is important to remember that in the heart of the faithful of Israel, there is a firm belief that exceptional individuals are singled out for investiture with the divine presence, which grants supernal communication, the gift of heavenly thought, that there are certain people who are just really, really good vessels for channeling the divine into human experience. And that there was a sense, even at the very beginning of the project of Judaism, that the development of real leaders and figuring out, I loved what you said about leaders having it and not manipulating it or abusing it, because, I think in many ways, that's the story of the prophets. That's the story of Moses versus Korach. That's the story. I mean, it goes all the way to the beginning. And I'm
it comes up, it comes up all the time, right? In our stories, there's always these like powerful, charismatic leaders who don't use their influence wisely versus those who do. I mean, that's just sort of the paradigm. Even, the Yetzer Ra and Yetzer Tov, like we're constantly in sort of this struggle for leaning into the best that is in us. But we're all just a step away from, I don't want to say abusing power because that's too harsh, but of taking advantage of our own authority.
So speaking of great leaders, we're really very fortunate tonight to have with us Rabbi Mary Zamor, who was originally my classmate, and then I think took an extra year to get to be even smarter than she started out, who was the executive vice president of the Women's Rabbinic Network. It's really wonderful to have you with us tonight, and an honor.
Hi, Mary, Amy, wherever you are. Wait, Dan, can I just push back on a question for you? Do you mind?
Sure, yeah, and then I'll kick it to my colleague.
I'm just curious if you felt like you had the certain that whoosh of leadership as a young person.
No, I wanted it. I wasn't always sure that I had it, and I remember I was elected class president in 6th grade on a platform of organizing a tour of the White House. And just feeling like an overwhelming sense of excitement to sort of be able to do something cool for my, but it wasn't always just about being in the front. I remember actually one of the great moments of leadership for me was actually in a very, very, very subservient role. I was an intern in the office of Senator Max Baucus of Montana. When I was in college, this is when George H.W. Bush was being inaugurated in January of 1989. And there's a program called Essential Air Service, which is a subsidy to pay airlines to fly into little places like Wolfpack, Montana, that wouldn't have a flight if they didn't pay someone to fly in there. But if they don't have a flight, they're 8 hours from anywhere. and they were going to cut these subsidies. And they gave me, at the age of 19, the project of saving this program. And so they came up with an idea that they would filibuster the nomination of the transportation secretary unless they restored the funding. And I went around to all these other Senate offices trying to get people, and I would call them and I would say, are you aware in Utah, you're going to lose 6 cities, in Wyoming, you're going to lose 9 cities, in Oregon, you're going to lose. And I got a whole bunch of different senators to sign on to this letter, and it worked. And feeling that sense of like, wow, like I could make a difference, and I'm 19 years old was overwhelming. And I don't want to say intoxicating, because it wasn't like that. It was just, I think, the most empowering thing I ever did.
It's a great story. It also speaks to leadership doesn't have to come from the front, which is really important, right? And that details matter. Thanks for answering that.
Thank you for both of those stories and comments, and then getting the conversation started in such a deep and meaningful, thoughtful way. So I'd like to add another layer to the conversation, Elka, and ask you, what makes Jewish leadership Jewish? So that's going to be the first part of the question. And then the second part is, what is the place of learning in cultivating authentic Jewish leadership?
I get asked the question all the time, what makes leadership Jewish? Why do we need, a foundation to teach Jewish leadership? I first want to say that leadership materials that are good, leadership books, leadership thinkers, great secular thinkers, apply to us as well. So it isn't either or. Either we go out and, go to the leadership section of the bookstore. Do people go to bookstores anymore? I still do. Okay. If you Google leadership, by the way, it's like the number of hits is crazy, number of books. There's great thinkers out there. And if we have time, maybe we can name some of our favorite thinkers. So I don't want to leave that behind. We teach great leadership because there are great leadership thinkers for all of us. All leadership, when it's effective, is value-based. And of course, we have values that we cling to and adhere to. And I think Dan mentioned servant leadership in his earlier comments. And Moshe is an Eved. He's an Eved Hashem. He's a servant. And I think sometimes, especially for rabbis, the notion of being a servant is a tough title. I'm not sure we all want to be suffering servants. And yet the word service is really powerful. And it's also, those of us who know Hebrew, service and work are the same root, right? So it's work to go out and serve. And I think that shorish, that root, is very intentional. We understand leadership is Jewish because we're partners with the Holy One. We're not on our own here. This isn't our vision. This isn't, me running out with an idea. Jewish leadership tells us that we are co-creators of the universe. That's a pretty heavy responsibility. We take it seriously. I'm going to give one more prayer reference because I love it. And we say in the morning prayers, Poteach et yadecha, you're supposed to open your hands and look at them. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but ask yourself, why are we told to open our hands and look at them in our own liturgy? Every day, open your hands and look at them. I think it's because we're God's hands on earth, right? We don't see the hands of God. These are what they look like, right? Your hands are what they look like. Everyone on this call, look at your hands. If you want to know what God's hands look like, you're looking at them. So effective leaders understand what they're holding, right? What's in their hands to do. And the obvious prayer reference that I have to name is what we call the watchword of our faith, right? The Shema. And good Jewish leaders listen. That's what we're told to do. Shema, O Israel, listen, O Israel. And I think good leaders are really good listeners. I think it's one of the hardest things we learn to do. We have patience. And I would also say at the heart of Jewish leadership is that we're all responsible for each other. We want to pursue justice so badly we say it twice, tzedek terdov. And there is this notion that has become so bantered about that we forget that it's really important. But repair of the world, tikkun olam, really matters. And that's the ultimate goal of Jewish leadership. Like, put the pieces back together, right? Take those hands and put the pieces back together, through your listening, through your co-creation of the universe. I would also say that the Jewish leadership comes in all different forms, which is very comforting for me. When I entered rabbinical school, and I know Mary Zamor is listening, so I know she's heard these stories, but I was unusual. I was, not only was the fact that I was a woman unusual, but who I was unusual. I had a pretty loud presence and a sense of humor, which wasn't necessarily what the school was looking for. And I sort of had to go to my sources to find out, is this okay? And we do have humor. We have Purim. We have raucous times. We have Miriam, who was an amazing optimist, right? My favorite story of Miriam is that there were tambourines on the other side of the Red Sea. What were those doing there, right? She told the women, bring your tambourines, we're getting out of here and we're going to dance on the other side. So, we have Moses, we have Miriam, we have Aaron, such different leaders, right? So there's a diversity, and there's not one right way. Moshe gets a lot of attention as our sort of paradigmatic leader, but we have a variety of leaders. We have kings, priests, and prophets, all very different. I could keep going, but I'll mention a couple more. One is that Jewish leadership tells you to show up. And I experienced this so powerfully when I was saying Kaddish for my father. And I would go to Minyan every morning at a small shul here in Columbus. And there were people there who showed up because I had to say Kaddish, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, what a gorgeous religion. What a gorgeous leadership message. I'm going to be there for you at 7:00 when it's 20 below. Hello, Boca. It actually happens the rest of the country. And we have stronger character because of it. The wind blows the door open and that 10th person walks in and you feel so held. So I think that's a Jewish leadership value, is we show up for each other and we hold each other. And that is a really powerful value. And by the way, I'll just say, in that year of Kaddish, I was at Jewish conferences and where there were thousands of people, and you would just say, we need a Kaddish minyan. And within seconds, you're surrounded in a circle of people who you'd never met. But that's a beautiful message of how we lead. We pay attention, and we pay attention to what you can't even see. And I think of Moses and that burning bush. You got to stop, look around, and see what might be there. And we don't live in a world that encourages that kind of stopping. I'm going to say two more things. I could go on about this for a long time. Leadership means believing in the people you lead. Jewish leadership means believing in the people you lead. And I've got to think of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. They had a tough congregation. Those 600,000 folks were stiff-necked. They were difficult. I mean, they were given, manna one day and complained about the food the next. They just had a certain impossible quality to them. And Moses didn't leave. He didn't ask for, can I get a new 600,000 people? He believed in them. And he told them that. And even when he says, they won't believe in me. God says, they are believers. They are the children of believers. And in the end, it's you who's not believing. Stand up straighter and believe in them. And I don't know if I'm sure you've all been classroom teachers, the rabbis on this call. And I started out my career as a classroom teacher in Forest Lake, Minnesota, teaching social studies to middle schoolers. Do you want your leadership tested? I recommend that for a week. And my mentor teacher said, if it's not going well, you can blame the kids or you can blame yourself. And that was a pretty good leadership lesson, that my lessons weren't sufficiently holding their attention. I will just end with, I think it's where you started. I think the highest form of leadership is teaching. That the most important thing leaders do is to know their stuff, to keep reading, to keep looking. Like, all the more so for Jewish leaders. We are the people of the book, and we are the people that just keeps peeling back the layers. And when you ask what's Jewish about leadership, this could be a 3-hour answer. Stay calm, folks, it's not going to be, but it could be a 3-hour answer because we have so many layers of who we are and what we are and how we learn. And good Jewish leaders can tolerate a lot of questions because we are also the people of the question. And nothing's more successful to me than a class where no one's satisfied with my answers. Right. And with that, I'll stop and let you ask the next question.
So you've reflected on the idea of paying close attention as a characteristic of leadership, because you see the things that are quiet and subtle and you might not otherwise see. But right now in the news, there's something very blatant, and that is the tragic convulsions of violence in Israel. So how do you look at what's happening through a leadership lens, and how is what is happening a case study in leadership? And what can we learn from the events of this past week and what led to this current explosion?
Well, thanks for that
Sorry.
softball question.
Yeah.
Look, like everyone, my heart is just shredded by the news and the images, and like all of you, what we're seeing are very familiar places. We're not just seeing Gaza Strip and West Bank. We're seeing the streets in Jerusalem, outside hotels we all stayed in, and we're seeing restaurants where we've all had coffee. I mean, it's just we have a home in Jerusalem, and it's very painful to see how close the violence is to this little place we call home. I am not a politician. I am not an analyst. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a policy wonk. I'm a Zionist and a Jew, and I'm heartbroken about what's happened. I think this moment calls for some pretty brilliant leadership. We've watched Israel have 4 elections in 2 years. They're heading for a 5th. There's been no clear winner. There's been no way out of this cycle. There's been no budget in Israel. We work with Israeli civil servants at the foundation, and they've been working without a formal budget for 2 years. Imagine that. There really has not been meaningful change. Everything has been status quo, because that's what you could do when you don't have a government. When you're satisfied with the status quo, you're not moving forward. And Israel has had the blessing of about 7 years of some pretty calm, I'd say calm, normal tensions, but it's been calm. And that was the moment when those leaders, in my opinion, should have noticed, right, what wasn't happening, which was we're not solving this problem. We're satisfied with the status quo. And I think those 7 years gave the state a false sense of security. If you listen to political speeches the last 2 years, you did not hear, here's how we're going to solve the conflict. You did not hear that. We heard about other threats outside of Israel, but not the threats Inside of Israel, I think there was, I think candidates were running for office without articulating a vision of how we could coexist. There was a bit of a look over here strategy, and I think the big problems were ignored. And well, there was a certain surprise element that we're all talking about. Where did this come from? There's been relative calm for 7 years. None of us should be surprised. I think the big surprise and the big disappointment and the big heartbreak is that these small neighborhoods and these buildings where coexistence has been happening has been broken. So where there were these small sort of grassroots projects happening, they're broken. Friends of mine who live in those buildings say someone who was their neighbor, 6 weeks ago is now turning against them. So we ignored the big problems, and now it's just, the floodgates have opened. There's hard truths in Israel that I think its leadership have ignored. 30% of Israelis live under the poverty line. 30% live under the poverty line. The gap between rich and poor in that country has been just widening and widening, and the politicians didn't talk about it. So there is a values gap and a leadership gap. And I think there's been a transparency gap. I think that there hasn't been sort of that ripping open your heart and soul and saying, we've got to figure this out. Like, you just haven't heard that from politicians. A few days ago, Benny Gantz, who's a defense minister, spoke to the country, and he spoke very briefly, and he said in a very serious way, we can't dismiss the situation we're in. It's serious. And it was a very jarring statement, both because it was scary, but also because there was this level of honesty that you don't usually hear from senior leaders in Israel, the political leaders in Israel. Israel has a certain macho quality, and I say that not as a gender term. It just, it's proud of itself with really good reason. So vulnerability is not a trait that they display well. That Sabra image, right? The prickly outside, soft inside. That soft inside is hard to get to, and I think the leaders have leaned too heavily on the hard outside. I'll just add that leaders of any kind, rabbis, cantors, educators, presidents, prime ministers, they tell a story of their community. I'm sure that the rabbis in this call, you have a story about Bethel and you tell it. And your community says, yeah, that's our story. That's right. And I think one of the challenges we're facing this country is that there's two different stories of America, right? And we are looking to our leaders to sort of help us bridge the gap where the two stories differ. I think Israel's story is a little behind where Israel is. So some of the leaders were still telling the story of 67 when in fact it's 2021. So how do we bridge that gap? I am a hopeless optimist. I just think this has got to be the place where the light gets in. Like there's so many cracks that someone will emerge with wisdom and with a new vision. But we have to be patient, and we're in this for a while. Please God, not this violence, but we're in this changing story for a while. That if you ask what the story of Israel has been the last 10, 15 years, we all love the startup nation story. That is a great story, right? But the startup nation didn't mean all the other stuff went away. We just got very connected to that and sort of didn't see what was happening around us. We were holding up a flashlight and not a lantern to see what was happening all around. But I pray with all my heart that normal tensions can take over so we can start solving the big problem. Does that make sense to you?
I hear in your voice the same yearning from despair that I think I've been sitting with all week, of wishing there were better visions of how to get out of the morass, or people willing to tell a story. I mean, I think what's been amazing is how many people have shared with me this Facebook post or this snippet or whatever of somebody exercising leadership in a way that gives them hope, as opposed to somebody who they think is just trying to get more validation from their base. And so, I'm reminded, our colleague, Rabbi Ofek Meir, who's the head of school at Leo Beck High School, which is the preeminent public high school. It's like a charter school. Israel has a different kind of an educational system than America, but it's like the Stuyvesant of, for those who are from New York, of Haifa.
Such an interesting comparison. It's the Stuyvesant of Israel.
It's where everyone wants to go, Jewish and Arab, and they have both kinds of students there, even though it's actually a school that's affiliated with the Reform movement, which is its own interesting layer. For those at Bethel, remember when we had Lotem Elon, who was our shlicha a few years ago, she went to that high school. And interestingly, she didn't learn religion at that high school. She had to go all the way to Camp Coleman in Georgia to learn that she really wanted to be religious. She was her own special kind of a leader. But he actually reached out to the heads of school of the Dati school, the religious school in Haifa, and the Arab school in Haifa. And the three of them came together and said, it's our obligation to educate out of hatred and to educate for peace and for coexistence. And they had a big sort of get together to announce with their different communities coming together. You're seeing people put a ring around their Facebook profile of, it's not necessary for Arabs and Jews to hate each other. You'll see a lot of Israelis who are putting this out there. It's its own kind of leadership. And as I'm thinking about, whether you're thinking about Israel or you're thinking about North America and the speed at which things are changing and all of the different ways in which things are changing in terms of the ways that people are thinking about mainline traditional kinds of Jewish institutions like a big Reform synagogue like Temple Bethel, the way in which they're thinking about the relationship to the organized Jewish community, the way in which people are becoming much more aware of elements of privilege or ways in which misogyny has been practiced, either overtly or inadvertently, in the Jewish community in many different places. Most notably, we've been hearing about in the synagogue through revelations about Central Synagogue in New York City, or revelations of things that have happened at the Hebrew Union College in years gone by, and in other ways and places where we're re-examining, I think, a whole lot of what it means to be a Jew as we are sort of in the first pieces of this third decade of the new millennium. And I'm curious, as someone who looks so deeply into and around the broad depth of the Jewish community, and I mean that specifically, the broad depth, because there's width and depth to, I think, the way, Elka, that you see us Jews, so what is the kind of leadership that we need right now? What kind of leaders do we need? When you sit with your committee and evaluating the hundreds of applications for the Wexner Graduate Fellowship or its related programs, or when you think about, all right, we have 2 to 4 years with these young people, not all of them are so young, what do we want them to know? What are you thinking about in terms of where you think or what you think Jewish leadership needs to be?
It's such a huge question. And we think about it, all the time. And we have so many competing voices, right? We need every Wexner class is about 20 people. We want the class to be sort of a mini Jewish community, a microcosm of the Jewish community. So we have to fill it with different kinds of Jews. We have to fill it with Jews of different kinds of backgrounds. LGBTQ Jews, Jews by choice, Jews of color. I mean, so you have all these demands so that Jewish leaders will bump up against people who don't look, think, and act like them, who don't understand Torah like them, and yet they can still learn from. And that's a really powerful experience, as you know well, though the classes are much more diverse than when you were a fellow 29 years ago, Rabbi Dan Levin. we're on class 33, 30 years ago. But a good deal comes of relationship and challenge and being tested for what you do hold firm. So I think the leaders we need for tomorrow need to be taught how to be bold. I think we have to teach collaboration, and we have to take it seriously. And I think that starts, I spoke on Tuesday, I guess, that when the Pew study was released, I was on the panel to respond to it. And I talked a lot about, we've got to teach new skills in rabbinic schools, not just HUC, but all the schools have to really get serious about teaching what does a collaborative leader look like? What sort of emotional muscles do you have to flex? How do you avoid a competitive model of synagogues, which we're in, right? We're competing for the Jews because fewer and fewer are joining shuls. So what do you do about that? The good news is that when Jews do come into shuls like yours, they like it. 92% of the Jews who go to shul, of the small percent that go, really find meaning in their synagogues. Those who go really like it. We have to rethink what it means to be religious. So we need Jewish leaders who aren't so eager to categorize our people, that religion looks a certain way. We need leaders who understand partnership and who understand partnerships they never would have considered before. I think shuls have to think, synagogues have to think much more broadly about who they are, what it means to be an institution where we are spreading Judaism. What does that look like? What does it mean to be a non-Jew who comes to a synagogue? Which I think the Reform movement has done really bold, creative work in the last 30 years. I think about what we've done as a community the last 18 months. We did the impossible. I played this game. If you had said to us, a year and a half ago, okay, we're all going to go remote and you're going to be able to go to Shabbat morning services in 10 cities, over the course of 2 months, and you can learn from 92Y on Monday night, and you can go to, Temple Emmanuel on Tuesday night, and you can go to to hear Brad Arts on Wednesday. It's all going to be remote. We just would have laughed, right? But we had no choice. So we just turned on a dime. And I think the Jewish community has to hold that, right? Our leaders, the three of you included, and your entire staff, what you did overnight is remarkable. I mean, we demonstrated flexibility and resilience and boldness we had no idea we had. So if we can do that, out of necessity, what can we do if we have the luxury of really thinking through possible changes? So I think we need bold leaders. I think we need leaders who are willing to talk across the boundaries and across the silos. And we need experimental leaders, and we need volunteer leaders who will support that, right? My biggest fear right now is that we're like a rubber band. We're going to snap back with just a little bit more stretch. We'll do a little Zoom here and there. Someone calls it, we'll have a phygital synagogue. Physical and digital mashed up is phygital. So we'll do a little in person, a little digital, but that's not going to be enough. I was speaking with a rabbi who said his bar bat mitzvah training has been totally revolutionized. All the kids show up on time, It's quiet. They're not distracted. They get a full half hour. There's no scheduling problems. However, he said, I miss the informal interaction with the parents, right? I don't get the kind of pick up, drop off moment. And I was in a group and he was trying to solve for that because his parents are demanding no more return to the physical shul there's no commute, but how do you pick up the informal? So those are questions that are small, but we have to like keep that snowball rolling down the hill and not let it roll over us. I think the hardest thing to look for when we're interviewing leaders is open spirits. You know, I just think we need open spirited leaders. We need really open hearts, transparent, who can demonstrate curiosity over outrage. And I think we're living in a world where there's a lot more outrage than curiosity. And I think we even have to teach curiosity. We have to say why and teach our leaders to say why and not what, because I think there's just this like, what, and we run. I think we have to teach our younger leaders to be open to mentorship from older leaders. And we have to teach our experienced leaders to hear what's on the minds of our younger leaders. And from my perspective, there's a huge gap there. That makes me very nervous. The Pew numbers demonstrated that the middle is sort of dropping out everywhere, right? You know, the Reform movement's growing, the Orthodox world is growing. Orthodox Jews are 75% Republican, while the rest of the Jewish community is 80% Democrat. So we have this, we're like coalescing around the polls. And I think we need sort of a comfortable, caring center that can have conversations with each other. So I think we also have to teach conversation, believe it or not. We have to teach people how to talk again. When I was talking to Misha about this, he said, do you think we could ever talk to each other? Like, was there ever a time when Jews were good at this? And I'm thinking about that. I don't know if we were ever good at it, but I think social media has made it all a lot worse, to your Facebook comment. So
yeah, I was thinking, I was listening to a podcast this morning while I was walking Charlie the Wonder Dog. It was a conversation between Adam Grant. If you don't know who Adam Grant is, he is a comer. He teaches at Wharton in organizational psychology, and he's brilliant. And he was in conversation with Brene Brown, who some of you know also is a really thoughtful student of leadership. And she was telling Adam that, because they were talking about his background, and she said, you know, when my daughter was getting ready to go to college, if she had said, I know I want to be a doctor, I know I want to be a lawyer, I know, she said, I wouldn't have paid for her to go to college. She said, the only thing I want you to major in is curiosity. Take a million things, and then you can figure out what you want to be. But if you already know what you want to be when you're 18, I don't want to have anything to do with you. It's a little harsh, I guess, to say to an 18-year-old, I actually do know. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but other people do. But I just love that she said to embrace curiosity and a willingness to look outside paradigms. I was sharing this with you, Elka, last week when we spoke. When I was a Wexner Fellow, there was one program we did where we had to problem solve an issue where we modeled a Jewish community, and we had to play a role that we weren't studying to be. So I had to pretend to be the Federation exec, and everybody had these different roles to play in this game. And then we were debriefing the game a little bit later. And Ron Heifetz, who's this brilliant teacher of leadership at Harvard, said, well, why didn't you do this, this, or this? And this friend of mine raises her hand and she says, well, you said we weren't allowed to. You said the rules said we couldn't. And he said, which has stayed with me all of these years, he said, well, who told you to follow the rules?
right.
Which I thought was probably one of the best leadership lessons that I ever heard.
Adam Grant, by the way, was the co-wrote Plan B with Sheryl Sandberg. And he has done a lot of study on grit and the role of grit and leadership, like staying in it, which I think, again, for a lot of reasons having to do with our attention span and social media, we aren't as good at just like staying in it. And his best book, I think, is Growth Mindset, which is really an important book and an important skill, that your mind is always, in a growth, you're thinking about growing. There's a new book out by, I think her first name's Allison, its last name's Gopnik, and she writes about the 2-year-old mind, and that we're never more curious when we're 2. And in thinking about what's next after the pandemic, she said, we have to think like a 2-year-old. And she describes going for a walk to the store every day, your same store. You leave the house, you take Charlie the Wonder Dog, you go for a walk, and you get to the store and you come back. You take a 2-year-old on the same walk, and it takes twice as long. And you are told, look, if there's a tree, there's an airplane, there's a trash can, and that we have to start looking at the world post-COVID like a 2-year-old and just see everything. And I think congregational leaders, probably more than most, you're just really busy. It's a luxury to sit and think and create and have the time to do that. And all you folks out there who are supporting these rabbis, give them the time to do that. Not Shabbat. That's why sabbaticals are important. And I think having a growth mindset and a curious mind, we think of those as natural, but you can learn that. You can develop that, and we have to have leaders who will do that. And I think if we do it together, break down some of the walls of our institutions and sit together and do that, you don't need a Wexner Fellowship to do that. I think we can really change hearts and minds, and we can build relationships that are unlikely, that will go to unlikely places. I think.
Amy.
Oh, so much to think about, Elka. I have my wheels are turning and listening to that, the notion and the idea of curiosity and wonder, and how we can use those approaches as we're looking towards the future, Jewishly and generally globally. So I wanted to just get a little bit personal and ask you specifically, what are the challenges and the threats that you see facing Jewish leaders? Another way to ask the question, I do hope that you sleep well at night, but on those nights that you don't sleep soundly, what is it that keeps you awake?
I'm only pausing because I have one answer all the time these days. So I want to make sure that I'm not answering too fast.
Take your time. We think time. We allow for think time.
Well, I'm trying to think of what else I would say if I didn't give my go-to answer. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But my go-to answer is that we have got to learn to talk across difference as a community. Full stop. We gain nothing through intolerance, and we're intolerant. And Dan may know this, but about 4 years ago, I just left Facebook. I couldn't, happy birthday was, like, you can't say happy birthday. Whose birthday is it? Look who's having a birthday. I couldn't do it. And I don't miss it, except that I think I sometimes am fooling myself thinking things aren't as bad because I'm not on. So I have friends who will say, did you see? So I have that advantage, but, and it's a 360-degree circle. I mean, the right is intolerant of the left is intolerant of the right, the young is intolerant of the old is intolerant of the young. I mean, it's, and again, I go back to, there's always been some of this. I mean, this is not new, but the dismissiveness of it is just very frightening. And we're working very hard at Wexner so that will hold, that those conversations can hold. That's sort of the planet we inhabit, and it's getting harder and harder. because the conversations are getting more and more, as I say, they've gone from caustic to toxic. There are great organizations trying to figure this out. You know, in addition to Wexner, Hartman's doing great works, resetting the table. I actually think, and Dan, this may go back to the question about training. I think the Jewish community has to add a professional category of facilitator, so that, or teach rabbis and cantors and educators how to be excellent facilitators of conversation, so that we can have conversations again. I mean, it keeps me up at night. Obviously, the whole Israel thing keeps me up at night, but we're all in that same sleepless state. I also think the cost of Jewish living keeps me up at night. And I worry, as I said earlier on the Pew call, that our day schools and summer camps are going to become privileged kids' opportunities, and it's the best of what we do. Our camps and day schools, even our synagogues are going to get priced out. Or if you walk to shul, then you can afford the synagogue, but not a home that's within the walking distance. So we're in this cycle of high cost Judaism. And by the way, I don't think free is the answer, but there's something between, free and just, through the roof costs. So that growing gap really concerns me. Obviously, equity and justice and fairness keeps me up for the world, not just for the Jewish people, but for the world as well. I think I'll just stop there. I won't sleep tonight. So,
well, I was going to say
we're not supposed to, so it's perfect. We can just stay up all night and worry.
Your timing is impeccable, but I would just offer to heat up a glass of warm milk and honey for those nights that you can't sleep, but not tonight. Thank you.
So looking at enrollment figures for the non-Orthodox centers of Jewish learning in North America, enrollments seem to be declining, and you're dealing directly with the students of many institutions, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, but enrollments are declining. What are the challenges in cultivating a new generation of Jewish leaders?
So you're talking about the enrollment at the
like HUC, JTS,
the
the non-Orthodox centers. I mean, ordination was recently, and we saw how small. I mean, I don't know how big your class was, but my class in Israel was, I think, 65. I don't know what the Israel class. Yeah, we had a big class.
What did you have, Dan?
Well, we started out, Mary and I think there were 50 of us, right? We didn't finish with 50. Well, it's interesting. We probably finished with 50 because there were some from the year ahead of us who dropped into our class, and some from our class that dropped into the year later because they took additional years for Masters of Education or additional study in Israel or whatever they chose. But, if you look now, those numbers have declined precipitously. There are more schools now.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say that when I went to HUC, there were 36 students in my class, a very holy number for those of you who care about Jewish numbers. There was a time when I came to the foundation, I was the director of the graduate fellowship, the program that Rabbi Levin was in. And we basically had rabbinic students from 4 schools: HUC, RRC, JTS, and YU. That was it. Today, we take applications from probably 10 schools. Right. So Amy, you're an Aleph Ordini, right? So we have Aleph students in the program. We have Hebrew College students in the program. We have Maharat students, the Orthodox School for Women, Rabbah. They don't call themselves rabbis. We have Chovevei Torah, which is modern Orthodox for men. We have some sort of non-formal, more private smicha programs that we admit students for. So we're up to, many, many, many more schools. I think the footprint, Jessica, of how many students are entering the rabbinate has stayed about the same. Interestingly, this year it is our application numbers for the fellowship were way, way up, dramatically so. So I don't know if it's like a post-COVID kind of meaning-making bump. I also think that Jewish leaders are being trained outside of traditional institutions. And we have to embrace that. There was a time, certainly when I was entering the field, where that was shunned and you wouldn't let them into rabbinical associations. And who are these people? Leadership is coming from all kinds of places. So I don't know if the numbers are actually shrinking in terms of who's leading. There are excellent lay leaders running congregations. I also will add the cost. It is if you go to a traditional institution, Dan may know this, but I have a daughter who will be ordained on next Sunday, a week from today, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, making the fourth rabbi in our immediate family. And just to prove my chops, we have my husband's a Reform rabbi, my son is an Orthodox rabbi, and my daughter will be a conservative rabbi. So we're just going to, have difficult Shabbat dinners every week. So, and beautiful Shabbat dinners, but the cost is staggering of supporting a graduate school for 5 years. And I've said this publicly many times, Wexner supports these students. The Jewish world should be supporting its Jewish leaders. If we want to attract the best and brightest, let's go out, find them, recruit them, and tell them, we want and care for you, and we're going to take care of your education. And then we're going to, mentor you into beautiful congregations and organizations and institutions that are fair and kind and equitable and safe. Like, if we want to get the best, we have to be the best. And I think those light bulbs are going off, but we have to really work hard to get there.
That's wonderful. Elka, I just can't tell you how privileged I feel that we had a chance to have this conversation tonight. I'm so grateful for your time. And it's just a privilege to be inspired by you. I'm excited to sort of get ready and raring to go. I'll share with you just one last thing. I was on a panel last August talking about how we were thinking about the approaching High Holy Days with a wonderful colleague, Rabbi Schwartzman, who serves Rhoda Shalom in Falls Church, Virginia, a fantastic, dynamic synagogue in the Washington area. And they asked her, well, so how are you feeling about these coming High Holy Days? And she said, I'm so excited. And everyone was like, really? Like, everyone else seems so worried or concerned or, overwhelmed. And she says, look, I've been doing this the same way for 30 years. The fact that we're giving ourselves an opportunity to completely rethink everything that we've ever done and to be creative and to explore new opportunities, I'm just sizzling for this. And I was like, yeah, that's who I want to be. And I think that, you've given us a challenge to think of all of us, no matter who we are in the Jewish community, to think about how we can exercise leadership in moving towards that real glorious future, both here and in Israel. I want to just share with everybody what we're going to be doing for the remainder of the evening. We're going to
Dan, can I have one last word to thank you?
Oh,
you're just going to
Oh, sure.
I want to thank you for having me. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Jessica, and thank you to your beautiful congregation. I know you're going to talk about Moshe and leadership in a few minutes, but I just want to close in thanking you by mentioning this. All kinds of midrashim about what happened at that mountain. Right? Was the mountain held over our heads, or was it a chuppah? But there's a beautiful custom that we stood at the mountain huddled together because we were afraid. Because the mountain was trembling, and that when the text says "Vayit yatzvu," they stood. They were actually huddled together, and they used the mountain as support, and the mountain sort of covered them like a blanket. And I think at the end of the day, good leaders offer comfort and sort of hold their communities. I know that that's what you have done for your congregation, and who wouldn't want to enter a field where you get to have that kind of opportunity? So I just want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you. That's very generous and beautiful. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a few minutes break, and then we're going to come back at 8:45, and we're going to look at a particularly interesting synthesis between the ways in which Jim Collins, who wrote a very famous book called Good to Great about management theory and how great companies emerge, and Moses's development as a leader. Rabbi Mates has her copy there. So we'll have a chance. There's an interesting paradigm that he addresses that we're going to explore about 5 different levels of leadership. And we're going to show how actually, if you explore the trajectory of Moses's life, he grows from the bottom all the way to the top. And so we're going to give everybody a little 5-minute break to stretch or to refill your coffee or your glass of wine or whatever it is that you're doing at home tonight while your cameras are off. And then we're gonna, so we'll reconvene in just a few minutes. And thank you so much to everybody. And again, Elka, thank you so much. Love to your family, and Mazel Tov on the impending ordination. Okay, everybody. See, some people are back. I saw Nancy had a question I think Nancy may have dropped off for a second, but she asked in our chat, how do we, what can we do to connect people that feel disconnected? I think she spoke brilliantly about that by teaching us how to speak across the divides, about teaching us how leaders inspire us to be able to talk to people who are different from us and to hopefully give us different windows of inspiration. I think that's a piece of it. And I think as she closed to talk about the loving presence that a leader needs to bring, I think in many ways is kind of a little bit about how you help people feel connected. There was a study that was done at USC in California that if you were learning a subject that you didn't care about with a teacher who you thought didn't really care about you, and you were trying to learn this subject, they would map your brain sort of energy and, blip, 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 nothing. If you were learning something that you didn't care about with a teacher who you thought really loved you, your brain would have. They saw actually that you could be inspired to care about something, to learn better, something that you didn't necessarily have any particular interest in, just because you knew the teacher loved you, or that you had a personal connection to the teacher. And I think that ends up being something that's really a powerful lesson that she taught. It was really a treat. I'm grateful for everyone for being here. And we're going to start. For those of you who are with us, we wish you Chag Sameach, and we're glad to have you. And tonight, we're going to have a chance to really do something that's a lot of fun. We're going to have a chance to look at some of the wisdom of this guy, whose name is Jim Collins. Jim, for many years, taught business at Stanford, then founded his own sort of independent think tank where he writes and he teaches about entrepreneurship and studies what is it that makes great companies great, and how do they go from a good company to a great company. And he, in this book, which is actually now quite old, it's more than 20 years old, the book takes a look at all different kinds of sectors in the economy, and what is it that they all sort of hit an inflection point, and some of those companies went bloop, 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 and some of those companies went phew. And he looks at across different sectors. He looks at Wells Fargo Bank, and he looks at Kroger supermarkets. He looks at Walgreens and some other companies who years ago hit an inflection point and then really launched. And he sort of said, is there anything in common that we see in these companies? And he looked at a lot of different things, but one of the things that he noticed was that all of those companies had the same kind of leaders, which he called a level 5 leadership. And there are these 5 different levels of what he considers to be a leader. So a level 1 leader is someone who is a highly capable individual, someone who just does their job really well. Someone who, when given a task, they go and do their task and they make a difference because of how well they do that task. And that's sort of the basic, and we often don't think of that as being leadership, but effectively when I was an intern, as I was sharing a little bit earlier, at Max Baucus's office, and they said, hey, go and work on this essential air service project. I was a level 1. They said, hey, write the op-ed and call the Senate offices and do the things we've asked you to do. And I did them well, and it made a difference. And that was a form of leadership. So Jessica, tell us about a level 2 leader.
I'm doing level 3, but I can just read from the chart, the level 2. Or do you want me to talk about level 3?
Right.
Or
I flipped it. Amy, go ahead.
Sorry, that's okay.
So a level 2 leader is also referred to as a contributing team member. This individual contributes their own abilities, capabilities to the achievement of the group's objectives, and they work effectively with others in a group setting. So I think today we might use the term that the person would be a collaborative team member. They play well with others, they work well with others, and they are good at moving the agenda forward of the group.
And why, Amy, would that be a higher level than a level 1?
Isn't 2 always better than 1?
Can be.
well, in this case, I would say if you're working on your own, sometimes that can be lonely. And the advantage of working as a team player is you have another person or people to bounce ideas off of and to work together and perhaps create something that is more significant because there are more people, more vision, potentially more resources involved.
Right, and it's a lot harder, right? So if you've ever been that person, or when your kids come home and they had to do a group project, they're like, let me just go do it by myself, right? It's easier to just sort of do your own thing. To work with a partner, to work in a team requires a more sophisticated level of engagement. Good. All right. Jessica.
Now level 3. Yes.
Sorry about that.
So that's okay. So Jim Collins uses this great metaphor of a level 5 leader having the right people in the right seats on the bus. So a level 3 may have a lot of the right people. Things might be really good. They might be a really, really good leader. They might not all be in the right seats, and you see it play out with phrase on the edge. So it's a competent manager that organizes people and resources towards the effective and efficient pursuit of predetermined objectives, which means like they're really good. They know what they need to be doing, but there's, I think, holes, and there's just something between that person that's not letting them be a level 5, but there's a lot of good that's there as well.
Right. And I think one of the things to understand about these levels is that these aren't value judgments. Like a level 1 leader is not as nice a person or as good as a level 5 leader. And sometimes it's the role that you play in the organization. So my sister, who I suspect is not watching right now, so I can talk about her, is an engineer, and she's a fantastic level 3 leader. She's a group leader. She has been a senior technical engineer for 30 years. And they finally drafted her into management or part of management. And she's a group leader at her company. The company says, you're going to do this project, and here's the piece of software we need you to develop. And then she and her team develops that piece of software, which is part of a much larger package of programming that they deliver to their client, which in their case is actually the FAA. And part of the projects they have are to redesign the air traffic control system. So these are not little projects, but she's not figuring out how to do the whole thing. She's not even figuring out which piece of the software to develop. That was developed by somebody else, but they say to her, develop this software. She goes with her teammates and she leads the team to develop it. Great. So a level 4 leader is like a leader in the ways that we often think of it. And it's someone who catalyzes a commitment to a vigorous pursuit of clear and compelling vision, stimulating higher performance standards. So we often think of effective leaders as people who really sort of just, drive the bus and who are inspiring. Elon Musk or Michael Eisner at Disney, or Lee Iacocca years ago at Chrysler, or Steve Jobs at Apple, or Bill Gates at Microsoft. We can think about these people who, because of their personal charisma and because of their ability to communicate a vision, because they stimulate higher performance standards, make their companies great. But then he says, and those guys are great. Those women who live in that way are amazing. But he says there's a higher level to leadership. And that is what he calls a level 5 leader, which he says is someone who builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. And what does he mean by that? So he puts these two patterns together. So he says, a level 5 leader is someone who demonstrates a compelling modesty. They shun public adulation. They're never boastful. But at the same time, they are passionately driven to helping their organization create superb results. They're the ones that are really driving that company to reach the next level. It's somebody who acts with quiet, calm determination that relies on standards, not charisma, to motivate. That it's not really about them. It's not about the leader. It's about the mission of the organization that that leader is a part of, and uses the standards, the bar, and the mission of that organization to inspire everyone to go further than they thought they could, not just because they are so powerful. And at the same time, they demonstrate an unwavering resolve to do whatever must be done to produce the best long-term results. One of the examples that he gives in the book is that Walgreens was a family-run company. And they realized when one of the Walgreens brothers became the CEO there, and the fact that I don't know his name tells you why he's a level 5 leader, because it wasn't about his name, that he realized there was just way too much nepotism in the company, just way too much nepotism. And people were getting jobs just because their last name was the family name. And he realized that that was going to hold the company back, not because these people weren't good, but they weren't great. And so he fired a ton of members of his family. Can you imagine what Thanksgiving was like that year in the Walgreens household when he's sitting around the table with 4 or 5 of his cousins and I think actually a sibling who he fired? But he realized that was what needed to happen for the company to reach the next level. The last one, which I like the most, says that it's someone who looks in the mirror, not out the window, to apportion responsibility for poor results, never blaming other people, external factors, or bad luck. You ever heard the adage that when you point your finger, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you? These guys, right? And so when something goes wrong, they say, what did I do? What was my contribution? What did I not contribute that led to that missing of the mark? However, when things do go well, it's someone who looks out the window, not in the mirror, to apportion credit for the success of the organization to other people, external factors, and good luck. And so what I wanted to do is to take a look at this sort of paradoxical blend of leadership and to show how Moses, in his lifetime, starts as a level 1 leader and grows over time to be a level 5 leader. And so the first text we're going to look at comes from the 2nd chapter of the book of Exodus. We know the story, right? Moses is hidden by his mother and he floats down the river. His sister is watching along and they find him. The other text that we could have picked actually was Miriam. And maybe the next time I teach this, I'll actually use Miriam as a better example than Moses, because her mother says, Miriam, go find out what happens to your brother. She's given a task. She goes and she realizes he's discovered by Pharaoh's daughter and exercises leadership, goes to Pharaoh's daughter and says, hey, do you need me to find you a wet nurse for this baby? And she says, sure. So you can imagine they put Moses in the river. After breakfast, he was home for lunch. And that was because of Miriam, who saved his life. But we're going to look at a little bit different example of level 1 leadership. If you look at this particular example, you'll see, starting in verse 11, sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. So he said to them, why do you strike your fellow? And he retorted, who made you chief and ruler of us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Moses was frightened, thought the matter is known. And so he had to run away. So why is this an example of level 1 leadership? What is it about what Moses does here that makes you think of level 1 in terms of the way that we explored it? Anybody want to offer an idea? I'm browsing. No. Oh, yes, Margaret, go ahead. You need to unmute there, Margaret, and then you can answer.
Well, what he did set a standard and he was copied. So the leader is responsible to set an example.
Okay, good. And did he ask anyone to go along with him? Did he bring a partner with him?
No, he just
did. He saw something that he felt needed to be done and he did it, right?
Yeah.
He was, Prince of Egypt going out and he said, I'm going to exercise leadership. I'm going to do something where I think I can make a difference. All on his own without anything in particularly different. Okay, good. So here we have Moses, and then he grows over time. He arrives in the land of Midian. He sits down by a well. and he lives his life as a shepherd. And then there's that burning bush thing. I don't know if you've ever heard about that. And then the Holy One speaks to him and says, Moses, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. No one's singing with me. You have to sing with me. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. So Moses returns, and we're going to get to our second text. And Amy, we're going to have you pick up there.
All right, so we're going to now move to level 2 leadership. And before I read the text, I'm going to refresh your memory. Level 2 is a contributing team member, and they contribute their individual capabilities to the achievement of group objectives, and they work effectively with others in a group setting. They are good at what they do, and they contribute to the success of the team. So that's the lens that I'm going to invite you to read this next text through. And here we are, and it says, and Adonai said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, and the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. And Aaron took instruction. He held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same thing with their spells, and they brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, plead with Adonai to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to Adonai. And Moses said to Pharaoh, you may have this triumph over me. For what time shall I plead on your behalf of you and your courtiers and your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile? How about tomorrow? That would be a good time. For tomorrow, he replied. And Moses said, as you say, that you may know that there is none like Adonai, our God. And then the frogs shall retreat from you and your courtiers and your people, and they shall remain only in the Nile. And then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to Adonai in the matter of the frogs, which he had inflicted upon Pharaoh. And Adonai did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they piled them up in heaps till the land stank. All right. You can use your imaginations to imagine what that scene looked like. I guess glad we're not there to smell it. So using that level 2 approach as a collaborative team member, how did Moses exhibit those characteristics? Feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, Aileen?
Well, his team member, I thought, was Adonai. I mean, he went to God and he said, or Adonai, and said, help me with this. And they were a collaborative team at that point, trying to help.
All right, so Moses and Adonai were working together. And who else did Moses have as a?
Oh, and Aaron.
And Aaron, right? So they were working together, Moses, Aaron, and God, to figure out how to help the Israelites be set free. And there you have it. They concocted a plan. Aaron did just what Moses told him, but what he heard from God. And they removed the frogs from the land until the next plague. So there we have an example of Moses working in relationship and acting as a team member, right? He no longer is just working for himself in the level 1 that we saw with the taskmaster. Now he is working with his brother and with Adonai, with the Yud He Vav He God, in order to raise his leadership skills. And now we'll move on to level 3.
Okay. So before we talk about what's here, I want to talk about what's not here. This is an incident with Amalek, who tries to destroy the Jewish people. But what is not here is what is something that is in Deuteronomy when the incident is recounted. And when the incident is recounted that we're about to read, it tells us that stragglers in the rear were cut down, were killed at this moment. It doesn't tell us this here, but when the story is recounted in Deuteronomy, it does tell us that some people were killed. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So from the wilderness of Sin or the Sinai, the whole Israelite community continued by stages as Adonai would command. They had camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses. "Give us water to drink," they said. And Moses replied to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Adonai?" The people there thirsted for water. And Moses said, "Why did you bring us up from Egypt and kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" And Moses cried out to Adonai by saying, "What shall I do with these people? Before long they will be stoning me." And then a little bit later, so then it goes on. So Adonai says to Moses, "Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing." Dan, I think this is the wrong. I have Exodus 17, 8 through 13.
Right, that's
As
level 4. That's not level 3.
Got it. Okay, got it. All right. Then Adonai said, "Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, take along the rod which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing there before you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. The place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreling, and they tested Adonai, saying, "Is Adonai present among us or not?" And right after this is things go worse.
We'll get to
Continues.
that text. But
Right,
we'll start
so-
with level 3 here, and then we'll get
So-
to the level 4 piece that you're referring to.
So part of what Jim Collins talks about in level 5 leadership, which is not present in the lower levels, is this thing called the flywheel effect. Like when things are really, really good at the top level of leadership, you think about how a flywheel works on a bicycle. It continues to spin even when you're not pedaling. That's why it's easier to pedal in certain situations. There's a momentum that is created. When you only have a level 3 leader, that's a good leader. You have a lot of great raw material. Like I said earlier, you might even have the right people on the bus, but they're not in the right seats. So Moses, here at this moment, he takes a lot on, and he has a lot of people around him who are with him, but he also has a whole community that is in conflict with him, who's not quite with him. He's not giving them yet that level 5 leadership. So what happens in this segment here that keeps Moses from becoming that level 5 leader and keeps him at a level 3, which is a really good leader and may have a lot of good people around, but once you get to situations that are difficult, may not handle them as well. So how does Moses not handle what's going on so well, and it plays out in ultimately him not being able to go into the land of Israel?
He gets desperate. He's desperate in his, like, what am I doing here? And so he sends that energy right back to the people, and like, why are you looking at me? Am I a leader? So he gets desperate, and he uses that staff and disobeys the inner voice, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think actually, Barbara, what you're referring to is a passage that comes much later in the book of Numbers.
I know, but
right, where
but
Moses is instructed to do it differently there than here.
Yeah, but the way Jessica, well, anyway, yeah, we know that's what's going to happen. That's
okay.
That's what
you read ahead.
That's because of 9 years of Torah study with you.
There you go. There you go.
So, but I still think he gets desperate at this point.
Mm-hmm. And that's with a level 3. Is that what you have, like, good plans and good attempts, but there's not that greater view. You don't necessarily anticipate everything that you should anticipate, which doesn't create the flywheel. Like, it's not going to create everything you need to be that level 5 leader.
Aileen, go ahead.
And I guess that's why in the very end, I guess I'm understanding this one, but is that why they're questioning him in the very end in line 7? That they don't feel complete leadership from him? That it's going to
So it's a little, yeah. So what happens is here, right, there's a problem. It's a legitimate problem. The people are in the middle of the wilderness. They don't have any water, right? So in a level 3 leader, is the level 3 leader expected to have a vision of how to solve the problem? No, right? A level 3 leader is expected to manage the team. So how does Moses manage the team in this segment where God gives him the vision, right? God tells him what to do. Look at verse 5, right? God says, pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take along that rod with which you struck the Nile and set out. And I'll be standing there with you, and strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will get water. Okay?
But then the people are going to turn around and say, well, wait a minute. Is this Adonai helping? Is he in control of this situation? You're like, almost like, is your Adonai in control of this situation for us?
Well, in some ways, right, they're trying, in some ways you might say, Aileen, that God is trying to give Moses some credibility as a leader here, right? Because as far as the people are concerned, Moses is the one who solves the problem. And in some ways, right, he's managing people. If you take a look at verse 5, right, God says to Moses, pass before the people, take a team with you, take the elders with you, and take the rod. I'm going to give you a task. You're going to do that task together with your team and perform it. You're going to supervise that team, right? But I'm going to tell you how to solve the problem there. Margaret, I see your hand. You still have to unmute. The rules don't change, Margaret.
Okay. So that's the problem. He just takes these guys from the tribes, but he doesn't give them any kind of task. They're just there watching him. There's no plan. He's still looking to above. And so these guys have no leadership, really. They're just witnesses.
Right. In some ways, he's brought along a bunch of level 1 leaders, right? He's brought along a bunch of people. They're the elders, right? Their job is to do that one thing, and he's brought them together, right, in terms of supervising them.
They're not learning anything. They're just witnessing.
Okay, so now we're going to look at level 4, which is the one that I think Rabbi Mates was referring to a little bit earlier. And I'm going to let her sort of pick up, because level 4, if you remember, right, is someone who's a great leader, but they lead from a place of their personhood as opposed to the standards. And we'll see how this particular story exudes that.
So if you just watch the chaos of this section, you can see how there's so much amazing leadership material, but it's just falling short of that level 5 flywheel. So Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, pick some men for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. Then, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, but whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. And as I said earlier, in reference to this text, in Deuteronomy, when this is retold, we actually learn that some people die. And I think actually the text is so merciful. Like, you know, Rabbi Levin picked these texts, but it's amazing. Torah protects Moses at this moment. It doesn't tell you here that stragglers, the weak and the frail at the end died. So it's showing you Moses as this incredible leader who's like, you can almost imagine he's like directing people, go here and do this and that. But what does Moses not remember is going to happen? What does Moses not think about in doing this? What's the problem that Moses doesn't anticipate in this section here?
that he's going to get tired,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the people aren't going to keep paying attention to him. It's not going to carry over. It's not going to carry through unless he stands there with his hand up the whole time, so to speak, or whatever.
And they didn't think about it. And here, the text protects you from knowing people died. But it's a real serious, if you're one of the people that died, that's a really serious consequence. And Dan, I was actually thinking about you when I was preparing this for the wrong level, but because one of the amazing things about Rabbi Levin is that, like, he's as comfortable with, like, the business side of a synagogue as he is with the spiritual side. Like, I've been with him when he's analyzed resumes of people interviewing for assistant rabbi jobs, and he just is I like the pretty font, and he's just able to tear it apart and say, look at this and look at this thing, or like budgets or things like that. And it's like amazing that what Moses doesn't have here, but will eventually have, is that, like, just ability to see, like, a big wholeness that leads to that flywheel. Like, the transition from 4 to 5 is that, like, there's not the loose ends, that the loose ends are tied up. And, like, Moses is so great. And look, he has his assistants who are so willing. Like, Joshua's going to battle and Aaron and Hur are holding up his arms. Like, he's got everybody on board. He's a really great leader, but, like, he just, like, forgets about his arms. And ultimately, like, people die because he forgets, because in those weak moments, people die. And if you're really that level 5 leader and create that flywheel momentum, or the right people in the right seats on the right bus, you're going to have your loose ends. You're still going to make mistakes, and mistakes are an important part of leadership, but you're going to have the whole picture.
It's a fascinating insight that you brought out about, how if he had anticipated his own fatigue, right, he would have been stronger. But let me ask, does Moses fail as a leader in this story?
Well, I think that's the interesting difference between the telling of it in Exodus and the telling of it in Deuteronomy. Like, if you look at it in Exodus, we won. But if you look at it in Deuteronomy, some people died. And Amalek becomes, this cursed name.
Right. So if you were my confirmation students, those who are being quiet tonight or who don't have their cameras on, I would be calling you out. Right. So Jeff, tell me, this is what happens when you leave your camera on. Sorry, Jeff. Hey, do you think Moses succeeds or fails as a leader in this setting?
I think he succeeds as a leader. I mean, he's been mentored by God, who picked him because of his competency and taught him how to put together people to accomplish a task. So I think the learning factor of the process he's going through makes him successful as a leader.
Right. And you could say, right, what was the problem? The problem is the Israelites were attacked, right? Amalek came and fought with them. We've got a problem, right? We're being attacked. And what does he do? He delegates, right? As good leaders are supposed to do. He says to Joshua, go pull together an army and go out and do battle with Amalek. Now, does Moses micromanage Joshua's leadership? Does he say, now approach him from the flank and then divide your armies and, have 2 go up the gut and 1 from the side and pinch them in the... No, he says, go out and do the battle. And what does he do? He goes to the top of the hill and he goes like this. Look at me. And what is he holding in his hand that is impressing people? Is that staff, that symbol that God is with them. So he's holding his hands up, right? He's using his personal charisma to help them to win that battle. He's using himself as a symbol. And when he is a symbol, go, oh, I'm getting a little sore, I'm getting a little tired, right? Then they, when his personal charisma or his personality weakens, the people weaken. They're like almost symbiotically related. And I think it's really fascinating what Rabbi Mates is talking about is that, hey, you know what? If he had his eye on the ball and less on himself, right? He might have been able to lead more effectively. He might have been able to create, as Jessica says, that flywheel effect where the people could have led their own. They would have said, hey, wait a minute, we've got people straggling in the rear. We've got people who are vulnerable. We have to protect them so that, when you have a really good flywheel, you have people who are leading, you have those level 3s and those level 2s who are doing that leadership for you without being directed from the person who may be the titular head of the organization. It was a brilliant insight, Jessica. I appreciate it. Margaret. 3 strikes and you're out, Margaret.
Okay. So the idea of the personal charisma, that's the reason these men helped him. And because he had gained respect through the time that he had led them, they took it upon themselves to assist and on their own. So in a way, his leadership had caused them to just go ahead and help him when he was having a little problem. They just stepped right in and did it. So he had been successful to me.
Excellent. Good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at what level 5 leadership. Can somebody remind me what makes a level 5 leader a level 5 leader? What was the thing that Jim Collins said made a level 5 leader something particularly special? What was it? Yeah, Barbara.
Unwavering resolve to do whatever has to be done.
An unwavering resolve to do whatever has to be done. And it's not about them. It's about the mission. It's about the higher purpose. And so we're going to take a look. So a little bit later after this, we know the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai. They celebrate Shavuot. They get the 10 commandments. They say to Moses, you go get the rest of the law. We'll do whatever you say. We can't handle it when the Holy One speaks to us directly. So Moses says, fine. So he goes up the mountain. He's gone for 40 days. And during that time, the Israelites start to panic because Moses was a level 4 leader. And because they relied on his presence and his charisma, what happens when Moses is not there physically to lead? They lose faith. And this is actually one of the interesting things that Jim Collins points out in his book was the difference between Walgreens and Eckerd Drug. How many of you remember Eckerd Drug stores? Has anyone seen any recently? Does anyone know why you haven't seen an Eckerd Drug store recently? Because they're gone. Because when the principal Eckerd, who built that chain, retired, he hadn't set the right people up to come in behind him. And when he left the company fell apart, and then CVS gobbled him up. And so in many ways, right, Moses was a level 4 leader. Moses is gone. And the people panic. And they say, Aaron, build us a God we can see. Because your brother Moses, we don't know what happened to him. So Aaron, in a fit of poor leadership, says, sure, right? And he asks them, bring me your earrings, and takes the gold and forms it into a golden calf. And then we get to this passage here. So Adonai spoke to Moses, hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Adonai further said to Moses, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation. So let's imagine you're Moses and you're hanging out with the Holy One. And you realize that your people have turned away. We're not even talking a month and a half since God spoke to everybody all together at once. And what was the number 1 commandment? Don't make idols. And what's the first thing they do? Make an idol. And God says, you know what? Get down there. Your people that you led out of the land, they've acted. And better yet, you know what? Just step aside. I'll zap them and start over with you. And you're Moses. Watch level 5 leadership in action. Moses implored Adonai, his God, saying, Adonai, let not your anger blaze forth against your people, not my people, your people, that you delivered, not me, you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that God delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger, renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them, not to me, by yourself, and said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever. So imagine what it would take as a leader to get up in the face of the Holy One and to rebuke the Holy One and say, wait a minute, you can't do that. What will they say about you? And you didn't make that promise with me, even though it might be nice that, imagine we get to services, and instead of saying, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, instead of saying, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, we say, Elohei Moshe, Elohei, right? But we don't talk about Moses in that prayer. Moses isn't even mentioned in that prayer. Why wouldn't we mention Moses in that prayer? He's the guy, right? Because Moses in this passage says, it isn't me. It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who you made the promise with. So think about it, right? Moses goes and he specifically takes himself out of the credit question and goes up against God. And what happens? And Adonai renounced the punishment that God had planned to bring upon the people. But if you think that isn't hard, try the next thing. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. He hurled the tablets from his hands, shattered them at the foot of the mountain. Now remember, why does Aaron make the god? Because he's afraid they're going to kill him. Moses takes their god and burned it. He melted it, right? When they say burned it, it means he melted it into a block. He ground it to powder. He strewed it upon the water and made them drink it. Now, I don't know about you, but that strikes me as significant professional will. Imagine you just took these people's God and you melt, and think about how much time it took to do that, to take it, to melt it into a blob, to let it cool enough, then afterward that you could then take, I don't know how you grind this thing into powder, but it take that much time. And no one messed with him while he did it. He just did it. And he put in their water and he said, drink this. And they're like, okay, right? Guess I'm having my golden fiber Metamucil drink. It's amazing to see what happens in this example of leadership from Moses here, where he throws himself absolutely into the mission, literally at the risk of his own life before God and the people, in order to bring about their redemption from this effort. So when you think about what happens here, it's really absolutely extraordinary. And what kind of leadership that Moses exemplifies. So, Amy, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing that I never noticed before. So when it says God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Israel, right? So normally we would think it would say Jacob. So why is Moses using the word Israel and not Jacob? It came to me that the word Yisrael can be translated as God wrestler. And it was God who renamed Jacob. So it's almost as if Moses is implicitly saying to God, remember that you renamed Jacob, this God wrestler. You're the one who labeled these people. That's what they're doing. They're wrestling. They're not going to just walk down the straight and narrow. So Moses, it was like a brilliant sort of slip of the tongue to let God be reminded that about the name change.
Great, fantastic. Other thoughts looking at this text? So I wanted to ask you, in your lives, either professional or personal, was there ever a time when you found yourself where you felt like you had to exercise level 5 leadership? And can you tell me a story of how you met that challenge. I'm seeing nodding. So Barbara, you were nodding.
Well, it's a tough thing that I went through when in 2008, when there was a crash financially and everything. And at the same time that that was going on, 3 people in my organization, and I had about 22 employees, and 3 people decided that they wanted to launch out and build a competing business. And that year was so full of tough decisions. But one of the things that happened was I sought a higher level. It wasn't about me, it was about the mission, to keep the mission going. And so this was before Facebook, and I just let people participate. And we created a campaign, and I see the way you do campaigns so beautifully. It's an invitation to participate. And within 1 month of inviting people, over 7,000 people sent me letters. And sometimes it was kind of like the It's a Wonderful Life when everybody rallies around, because all the people that I had forgotten that I had helped in level 3 leadership or level 4 leadership, I had to be vulnerable and say to that community, if you want this mission to continue, we have to work together. And
Excellent. Beautiful.
and it happened, and everybody saved it together, not just me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. Does anyone else want to share an experience of leadership where you felt like you were called upon in that way? The nodding stopped.
Well, I think that, in organizational leadership, that's where I've had experience, that you have to constantly help people take over positions and tasks, because it's easy to just do it yourself. But the most important thing for the leader is to train other people. That's a really foremost. And I think we see that in all our organizations. How you bring people up. There's a level of this, this job, that job, whatever, and then to reach the top, you're able to perform all those jobs. You've done those things, but that's important of leadership. A leader 5 to me is that you're able to delegate, that people learn and feel strong enough to take over.
Beautiful. I'll share with you a story of level 5 leadership that I learned recently. It involves the story of President George H.W. Bush. And many of you will remember that President Bush came to office after having served as vice president to Ronald Reagan for 8 years, and then assumed the presidency. And there was a lot of concern that he had a reputation for not being a strong leader. And he, of course, as you will all remember, was president during the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall in November of 1989. And there was a lot of pressure on him to go to Berlin and to declare triumph in the West. And all of his advisors were saying, you've got to go to Berlin. And President Bush said, no, I don't think it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to go. And he started to be roundly criticized. What, you're not going to go and celebrate the triumph of the West, you weak leader? Many actually attribute this to the beginning of the narrative of weak leadership that ultimately led to his defeat in his reelection in 1992. And still, he refused to go to Berlin. And why did he refuse to go to Berlin? Was it that he didn't feel like an international trip on Air Force One? Was it not because he knew that politically he would gain all kinds of points for dancing a victory dance on the rubble of that wall? No, it was because he knew the risks that Gorbachev was taking in the former Soviet Union to dismantle communism and to somehow find a way to take down the Iron Curtain without it crashing and hurting people, and to try to somehow effect some kind of a peaceful transition against a lot of people who were entrenched against him in the former Soviet Union. And he knew that if he went to Berlin to declare victory for the West, it would make Gorbachev look weak in front of his own people, and that it would make it harder for Gorbachev to do the work that was in the long-term best interests of the United States and the West. And so even though it was a massive political hit for him, he refused to take advantage of his opponent because he knew that that would be what was in the best interest, not of his political future, but of the United States and literally the entire Western world. And so when we take a look sometimes at what is asked of leaders, our political leaders, our religious leaders, the leaders here in America, the leaders here, or I should say in the state of Israel that we're watching and that we're critiquing and that we're, who we choose to champion or don't choose to champion, ask yourselves what kind of leadership they're effecting. Is it about their own personal aggrandizement, or is it about the larger mission of what it is that they're seeking to achieve and what it is that that organization or that country was brought into existence to try to accomplish? And I think that if we in the Jewish community or in America or in Israel could somehow find ways to celebrate and champion and cultivate more level 5 leaders, we might find that we as a society might go from good to great. So, Aileen, I see your hand.
Over the past few years, there have been so many stories of Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I can't help but feel that's always felt the way that starting with that first case of hers where she was trying to champion for women's rights, but she went about it by going for a man who was a sole provider and everything, that this was her way. She just seemed to have so much humility and obviously know how to get what she wanted and stuff like that, but for the betterment, for the greater betterment, not for necessarily one political side for so many years over another political side, but for a much bigger picture. And I just feel that you've talked about her a lot, and everybody's read about her a lot, and I just think that she really represents that kind of level 5 type of a person.
Agreed. Agreed, for sure. So I want to wish everybody Chag Sameach. For those who would like to join us tomorrow at Temple Bethel in person, we will have Yizkor services and Shavuot morning festival services starting at 10:30. You do not have to go in person. You can watch the live stream as you have for Friday nights. You can find the live stream either on YouTube or you can find it on the Temple's website under Virtual Bethel. And all kinds of other wonderful programs are continuing through the months of May and June. So Lunch and Learn continues with Rachel Korazin, who is bringing us extraordinary opportunities to learn Israeli poetry, and God willing, she will remain safe. And if there was ever a time that we wanted to learn Israeli poetry, it's certainly now. And if you haven't had a chance to learn with Dr. Korazin, you should really take the opportunity to do that. She's a brilliant master teacher, and she really makes Israeli poetry come alive. You can find more information about that and other programs at the Temple's website. So we wish you all Chag Sameach, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Many thanks to Rabbi Pesa and Rabbi Mates for helping with our discussion earlier and our text study tonight.
Thank you
Chag
all.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.